Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of
those places where I felt by talking to you, I'd probably be able to get an answer, because I was not completely able to get it from the book, because the book is not going to be able to treat everything under the earth, right? You've treated all the main ones, and you did a great job of showing. Here's one that I want your help on. So let's assume that we have developed, I don't know, a gene therapy or some kind of a thing that allows us to live, let's say 300 years, a healthy life, 300 years, right? Let's do that thought experiment. So and let's also say that it is affordable by everyone, so we don't have like classes of people. Everybody's able to afford it. It's optional if you want to, and I guarantee you everybody is going to want to. 300 years. And then as you age, you maintain your health. So it's not like you're going to live 85 and the rest of it is going to be misery, right? Let's just assume all those things. I want to hone in on the specific problem or the specific issue of my concern. So let's say we are in that society, and let's say we have been in that society for 100 years, right? So now we have people who are healthy out there who are 100 years old, and they have 200 years to go to do whatever they want to do. Let's say we're in that state. Now, my concern is those 100 years old who are completely healthy, they are active, they are, when I say healthy, I mean not only healthy in terms of their bodies, if we want to make that distinction, but also their minds and so forth, right? So they are completely healthy mentally, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. They're just healthy human beings who are happy to be alive. They are productive. They're doing they are contributing to society and so on. They're not a burden. Let's say they exist. Now, those folks are probably still working, because for me it feels like work is not. We're getting to a point, especially people, and we can feel and see it in people who are affluent. They work not to make money; they work to self-realize, right?
Yeah.
They work because they want to use all of their capacities, and it just brings joy to them to be able to wake up in the morning and have something to look forward to, part of a bigger plan. So people are 100. I can easily see people are still working. And when I say working, not working to produce, they're working to self-realize, right? They could be working because I don't see the problems of the world disappearing. I mean, there will still be people who are disadvantaged. There will be people who need to be educated. There will still be issues. Or maybe they are artists and they want to practice their art, and they have new concepts they want to introduce and so on. Let's say we are in that society. Now, my concern is the following. Somebody who's 100 years old, who is really productive and so on and so forth, and then you have somebody who is in college and is about to graduate, right? And the youth, right? Those folks, they want to self-realize too, right? If we are in that world, why would how can we avoid having this new let's say class warfare between the old and the young, with the only difference being that the old are no longer infirm and all that. They just have a lot of connections, a lot of money, a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, a lot of everything. All of the resources they have are under disposal. So it's basically a hopeless cause for anyone who is young to compete. And I'm using this word consciously, these very loaded words, compete against the folks who are older. Those folks, they have lived, they have seen things, they know things, they hang out with each other, and you look at all these youngsters as rubes. They don't know anything, right? They have energy, but you know what? We also have energy. The one thing that distinguishes the old from the young is the young come in, they have energy. And so that's one, the class. And number two, these folks who have been here for 100 years and are still active, they are set. Maybe they are set in their ways. They have certain ways of looking at things. And these young ones, who want to come and sort of take over, usually they do that by overturning the status quo, by bringing in ideas that are against the ideas of those guys, right? I just look at, for example, one symptom of what's going on, or what might happen is, now in the U.S. Congress, the leadership is all in their late 70s and in their 80s, right? These folks are healthy. The reason why they're staying is because they're able to function. And then you have those who are revolting, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they're young, the OAC, and on the other side, Bobert and all that, they come in and they just want to challenge, right?
Yeah.
So I see it a little bit in there. Tell me what's your reaction to that argument?
Yeah. So on the one hand, you bring up the possibility of a kind of a generational constant conflicts, and on the other, that there's a risk of a social stagnation, as the old will also be the kind of entrenched power and so on. So new ideas will have a difficult time to be heard and so on. So, well, first of all, something like that is already going on, one could say. And despite that, you look at where innovation happens in the world. It's very often in places where they have the oldest population. So you look at the most progressive societies in the world. I mean, we would probably say Finland and Denmark, right? And in larger societies, we would say Japan, perhaps, right? And so somehow, right, it makes sense for us to have this fear. But when we look at it empirically, one should think that one would already see this. And one would see it most in the countries that has the largest proportion of all people. And we do see it. It's not like it's not there. It is happening, but it's not preventing these societies still from being the most progressive somehow, right? So when it comes to the political world, I think there would have to be new regulation. There would have to be new term limits. There would have to be, for example, they talk about the Supreme Court even, that they would introduce term limits, like they have for the president in the US. He can only be elected 2 terms, right? But for more offices, right? So that's a kind of democratic way of dealing with it. When it comes to the business sector, I mean, somehow, despite the entrenched power being on the side of a company, new startups do succeed all the time, despite that. So you got General Motors challenged by Tesla, which is like an impossible thing, really, you might think, to begin with, right? And now it's a reality, so it can happen, right? And also, again, I feel that this is a bit hopeful, that since we will be aware of this new condition, that we will be a bit self-aware, and we would try to put in some guardrails against this, or some ways of solving, and an openness about these possibilities, right? That we invite in younger voices. I mean, it could be possible, like that there's a certain kind of age representation, both in the private and the public sector. So that just like you assign places for people from different states, you might also assign people from different generations, so they have a voice. So I feel that it's absolutely correct that there probably will be these challenges, but it's also not impossible for us to solve them. And already now we see that it seems like progress is compatible with having a high life expectancy and a large proportion of older people. So in some sense, looking at that, shouldn't we extrapolate from that and say, yes, just like today, there are problems with this, and just like today, there are solutions to that, right? And they will never be perfect, right? There will be these struggle. So you have to accept it. But when it comes to the larger argument, and this is something one always has to go back to, is this supposed to be an argument in favor of aging and death? Is a suggestion here that these challenges are just so terrible that it's better that people fall apart and die?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd rather have these problems and be alive, right, than be dead.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the these arguments, they fall apart when you confront the person and say, just like you said, right? So do you mean that? No, right? But I think what is useful in the exercise of engaging your arguments is, okay, obviously this is not an argument that or my opposition doesn't mean that I am going to accept that it's black and white. Let's just not do it because we may have class conflict, right? It doesn't make sense, right? But it does actually, it's helpful in saying, in being able to say, well, clearly this is going to be a problem. Let's prepare ourselves for it, right? Let's set up what needs to be set up. And a notion occurred to me just now. You know, there is this concept of the natural, right? The natural in the natural world, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this thing about the natural. It feels to me an ideological natural, say in capitalism. Say, well, this is how capitalism works, right? And so let it do its thing, the invisible hand, all that crap, right? As opposed to you know, just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good. You know, you call it natural because you have the financial consequences. You have people who actually, you know, kill themselves because they were ruined and all. So these are bad things. Don't you agree? Yes, I agree. And so I think once one accepts that we are human beings and we can use our brains individually and collectively to think about the future and to plan for it, as opposed to thinking that, well, this is the machine that we're in, it's out of our control. You know, once we start to think that way, then I think then we can start addressing these issues, which is, well, but let's start thinking about, now we're in that society, we need to be inclusive in terms now of the young people, because today it's the old people that we need to be inclusive with, right? But the old people are going to have a lot of power. Those guys. And so maybe we can use the model we're using today, which is being inclusive to minorities and older folks, right? Because today the power is with the youngsters and so on. So I totally understand that. Okay, so I want to use the last 20 minutes to talk about the following. So you talk about a lot about Epicureans and the hedonists and so forth. That's sort of important to your argument, to how you're pushing back. And let me start with this, right? So let's say we are in that society where people are able to live 300 years and some, and they're healthy and so on. But in your book, you do say that what you're talking about is not that a world where nobody can die, right? That can, you know, somebody is bionic or whatever, right? They just can't, they're indestructible. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about something a lot more imminent, it feels to me, given all the technologies that are coming, which is or happening already. People you know, I read somewhere that people who are born in the early 21st century should expect to live 100 years. I mean, that's the expectation, given where we are today and where we're going to be, as long as we don't destroy ourselves in this planet through some war or whatever, right? But otherwise, we are on a path towards that. But here's the thing, right? You do say that death will still remain part of life, meaning people will get hit by a truck, right? Or murders or whatever it may. Death will remain a thing that will concern us. In fact, it may concern us more because we have a lot more to lose. Because now we could, you know, I still am healthy, right? I still do things, so I don't want to put myself in a position where, but death will still remain as part of life. Now, let me go to the Epicureans. So for you, the Epicureans are folks who you don't agree with because they seem to you to sort of make death be acceptable, right? Let's just accept death as is, right? And you know, let's and they're hedonists. That's the sort of interesting thing, right? The only good is enjoyment, right? And yet somehow they introduce this concept of accept death and rationalize it and don't be afraid, blah blah. And then you don't like that. Now, here's the reason why I want to sort of see how you can push back to my pushback, which is this. It seems to me that being Stoic and being an Epicurean and seeing death that way is a way of life that is completely compatible with what you're proposing in the following way. It's in fact it strengthens your argument in this way. Okay, death is still possible. Don't get anxious about it. Live your life. Go live your life. If you die, you die. But don't get anxious about it. Don't worry about it. Doesn't that make your argument or the life of someone who adopts both the Epicurean as well as your way of looking at things doesn't make that even better than weaker? Isn't the Epicurean just providing a technique or a tool to enable you to reduce your anxiety so you can enjoy your life more during those 300 years? How would you respond to this pushback to your viewing the Epicureans as folks who are proposing something that is completely incompatible with what you're saying?
Yeah. So my beef with these philosophers, so my problem with these philosophers is when they go so far to claim that death is no harm to us, that death cannot harm us. So I'm just against that claim. So it's true. I completely agree with them that one shouldn't spend too much time worrying about death. And they're completely right that if death is the end, then when you're dead, you can't be harmed anymore, right? It's true. But I feel that they are going too far if they sincerely want us to believe that death is not bad for us. Because if we believe what they believe, and I know a lot of people, I mean, as long as I can remember, who say, well, I don't care if I die, or, death is not a problem because when I'm dead, I can't be harmed or I can't suffer when I'm dead. I mean, it's like nothing. It's just like sleeping. So why should I, worry about that? Why should I think that death is bad? So I feel that very nonchalant attitude towards death is not one, of course, that will motivate people to get into a radical life extension or try to do something to prevent death, right? It's just a very kind of course, passive attitude. Of course, Stoicism has been accused of having a certain passivity, and also the Epicurean, that they're saying, what is the source of anxiety and misery? Well, it's that you want things that you can't have. And so what is the cure? Well, you make your life very small. You try not to have desires that are difficult to satisfy. You stay within your little circle, ambitions and lofty projects and so on. They are completely in the hand of fortune, and they might go completely wrong, and then you're going to be disappointed and sad and so on. So stop wanting things that are not really easy for you to obtain, right? Focus on that which you can have and so on, right? Now, for somebody who is overly ambitious, that might be very good advice. But it's also, if taken literally, right, the way they say it, it's also not in any way an attitude that would lead anyone to try to extend the natural limits of our lives, for example, or fight disease, or try to invent something big, or et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I don't like with it at all. Yeah. I think it's false. I think death can harm us even if we are not suffering when we are dead, right?
Yeah, no.
And they disagree with that.
And I want people to go to the book to because you make a good case there as to harm, what harm means, right?
Yeah.
It harm people.
So I think you should be afraid of death. I mean, I think it's incredibly natural. I mean, that's why we look left and right before we cross the street. I mean, it explains a lot of our instincts. Of course, if we weren't afraid of death, why we would be afraid of heights and snakes and so on. It all comes down to that. It's not something that we should say, I have absolutely no fear of death and death can't harm me. That's also a way of escaping a truth. I see this too, that life is a bit tragic, that which can really harm us, that is our annihilation, is coming for us. I mean, and that's, I think, too much for a lot of people to handle. And so they will come up with philosophy that some way tames that or makes that all right and palatable in some way, right? So, yeah, but I say you have to, on the one hand, accept that death is really bad, that it's most likely going to happen to you before you want it to happen. And then in the same time say, well, I'm not going to allow that fear or that terror to take over, but not by lying to myself that what is bad is not bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've heard of cognitive behavior therapy, right?
Yeah.
Which is you just talk yourself through the fact that you are not, in a state of, you're not endangered, or you break it down so that you are able to reduce your anxiety, and by reducing anxiety, you'll be able to open up and think and act. Because as your studies show that once you're anxious, you cannot think. You cannot think really. You're just focused on defending yourself. The cortisone is flowing through your veins. You're not creative. None of that, right? But if this technique of that Epicureans propose and this philosophy allows me, even if it's a lie, allows me to relax so I can enjoy myself. I can enjoy myself and make the most of those 300 years. What is the harm in that? Number one. Number two, remember, the Epicureans, and even today, we live in a world of scarcity. We live in a very horrible world, right? They lived in a horrible world, and we continue to live in some people live in a much more horrible world than we are. So that whether it's religion, or whether it's Epicureans, whether I don't think one can say, you fools, right? You're fooling yourselves. Who are we to talk about that if somebody is suffering and their suffering is materially relieved by believing in, I don't know, a god, or believing in the divinity of some little statute, or believing in the Epicureans? I see the argument of, you little fool person, wake up, that's completely sort of callous. I'm not saying that you're callous. Completely cold when somebody's facing how to deal with the death of their daughter who is 12, right? How do they deal with that? Do they just say, nah, I'm going to stick with the truth, right? So how would you deal with somebody who says that to you, that, you know what, the Epicureans, I'm going to take what is good out of them. I'm going to throw away the stuff that has me just being passive and receptive and saying, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to have any ambitions. I'm going to go and pursue. I'm going to pursue my passions, but I will never be scared by death, because when I'm dead, I'm dead. But why is that not a way of sort of appropriating the Epicureans or even religions and so forth, and saying they have something good to offer, because death will remain with us and we need to deal with it, so that we're not, number one, we're not scared of it. Number two, when it happens to us, we can go on and do some more good on this earth.
So that's a very good comment, I think. So on the one hand, my answer is, if you're doing philosophy, I think the aim of the kind of philosophy I'm aiming at doing is truth and nothing else. And I think when I look at their arguments for why you shouldn't regard death as an evil or something bad, I just think they're lacking. And I want to separate that from a view of how do you live the happiest life, or the life with the less anxiety and so on. So I want to separate that.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
And then allow for what you say on the other hand. So it's a complicated maneuver. In some sense, what really matters, people are different. Most people are not philosophers. And what matters is anything that we fear. Let's say people fear global warming, right? You feel that. The important thing is not to fear it, but it's to act in a way that you avoid it. And for me, it's not important that people walk around with fear of death. And if they can imagine something that calms them down and allows them to live the best life, that's fine, as long as it also doesn't breed passivity. I mean, the important thing is they try to do something about it, extend their healthy years.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me leave on this note. So this is the book, guys. You need to go and buy it and to read it. And you need to read it and take a lot of notes. I mean, it's riddled with notes. And you will learn a lot from it. You'll learn a lot, and I think it will open your eyes and also create some new ways of looking at things. Just like I started the conversation with me looking at all the folks as a version of myself, not a category of folks, and it allowed me to have much better behavior, and also allowed me to listen more carefully and hear things that otherwise I would have categorized as, okay, there's an old person talking. Let me go and find out. So it made me a better person, and in fact, a better listener. But I think in terms of the last point you made, I think when somebody's hopeful, right? When somebody's hopeful, when they have hope in their heart, there's a future that they're looking forward to, they'll be creative, right? They'll live. Philosophy is philosophy, and philosophy is whatever. It's an exercise in playing around with concepts, but there's life, right? And so as long as your argument provides hope, as long as any other philosophy provides hope, whether it's a religion or it's a piece or whatever it may be, right? As long as that provides hope, allows us to wake up in the morning feeling good about ourselves, I see all of those as instruments, as tools. Maybe I'm a pragmatist, right? As tools that enable us to do the best that we can with the longer life that we have. But I'm going to leave. I'm going to give you the last word on this. If you were to, and this is not going to be easy, but I'm going to see how you do as I put you on the spot. If you were to create a slogan, okay, a slogan that we can put on a bumper sticker that you would put in your car if you drive or on your laptop, what would that slogan be that would encapsulate and capture your philosophy or your mission, as it were?
Life is good, death is bad.
Okay. With that, I want to thank you so much for making the time to speak with me. It's been a pleasure. I even learned this during this 1 hour, a couple more things. And again, I plead with people to go and buy this book. It's by Amity Press. It came out last year, so it's up on the latest and greatest of of what's out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.